Hello, and welcome to the December 5th, 2018 edition of Shrewsbury Matters, a monthly show that presents a different perspective on the town's politics and problems. My name is John Lukács. There was no November show, Shrewsbury Matters show, because of scheduling problems and the Thanksgiving holiday. But I will be, again, doing new shows, taping monthly starting again in January. Today's show covers a number of topics, including the results of the votes on the $92 million Beale School replacement project, the town's water system quality and service now that the new water treatment plant is operating, Shrewsbury Electric, Selco's recent letter to its cable and internet customers regarding the possibility that Comcast may decide to enter the Shrewsbury market as a competitor of Selco, the direct and indirect benefits that Selco provides the town and why they are so important when town and school budgets are being considered. A recent town report on the number of school children in housing developments, selected housing developments. Third is additional information about the mixed-use districts, the Lakeway District and the Route 20 zoning overlays. Also, the potential lawsuit against the town concerning the town's creation of the Route 20 overlay district itself. And if there's time, maybe a couple of comments about the marijuana issue now that some towns have started selling retail marijuana. But first, let's start with the $92 million Beale School replacement project. That project was overwhelmingly approved at town meeting and approved by a 2/3 vote in the townwide election. This is good news, but it is more bad news. The good news is that the new school will eliminate overcrowding in the school system. But the bad news is that the total project cost will be much higher than a school with an elementary enrollment of 790 required, at least $15 million more. And why is that? Well, first of all, a much larger building size than the Massachusetts Building Authority said was adequate for an elementary school of 790 students. And obviously, a much larger school building footprint means a much higher cost. Second was the bloated, overstated, estimated cost per square foot for the building, which again was much higher than the MSBA's guidelines. The result is that extra funding will be available, and that extra funding will be used either to add nice-to-have features to the school, to pay the additional site demolition and preparation costs that the building committee may have underestimated, I believe it did, or to do both. And with any money left over, the building committee will claim that they did a great job controlling project costs, what a wonderful selection process, what a wonderful building process it was, what a great building committee they are, and everything like that. When in fact, they deliberately overestimated most of the major building costs to begin with. For a more detailed explanation of these problems with the new school, viewers can go to the town's online video library and watch my October 2018 edition of this show. So now that the school project has been approved, what should Shrewsbury residents have learned from this process? Well, first, the building committee and town officials did not do a good job keeping building costs and future operating costs as low as reasonably possible for a school building required for just 790 students. Second, the process was seriously flawed. Most building committee meetings were not public hearings, despite what some public officials will tell you. So since they were not public hearings, the public did not have the right to comment and challenge the false assumptions of the building committee and its consultants at those meetings. Third, it is again apparent that the small group of people who run Shrewsbury continue to make serious mistakes in managing the town. They are not the experts they claim to be. Here are just a few of those serious mistakes. First, the acquisition of the Allen property for $6 million in 2001. And they purchased that property and really didn't do an analysis of the property to determine its true worth at that time. And only now have they identified serious problems with developing the site. That they identified those problems as part of the site selection process for the school, at which point the consultant said that there were all kinds of major problems with the site, and only about 25% of the site was buildable. Not so there was no justification for paying $6 million for that site to begin with, and they will probably never recover that full $6 million when they sell the site. Another mistake was the continued overestimation of building costs over the last 10 years. Not just this building. The middle school building started out as costing over $50 million, and they whittled it down, finally came to the town for, I don't know, something like $46 or $47 million, and it finally came in at around $42 million. Yes, they should allow for a margin of error, but those kinds of overestimates are just not called for. Another mistake is the zoning decisions that have substantially increased the potential number of residential units in Shrewsbury. This is from the same people who tell you continually that the town already has too much residentially zoned area and too little commercial. Makes no sense. Another mistake is the poor handling of the town's water problems since the state imposed standards on the town in 2002. Those problems include poor water quality, enormous amounts of unaccounted water every year, unfair water rates, and poor management of the water billing system. Okay, so I'm going to go into detail on some of those points and raise some of the other topics I have for today. So first of all, the town's water system quality and service, now that the new water treatment plant is operating. Well, it has been operating for a couple of months now, and the selectmen made a big show of going on a tour of the new facility. It's on their selectmen's roundtable, and extolling all the virtues of the new water treatment plant. And of course, it is needed. It was long overdue. That's one of the problems with their decision making, is that they didn't realize they had this problem and deal with it a lot sooner. And that's why people were having water quality problems, the black water and the staining and everything going on with the water they were getting. But having said that, don't be misled. We are going to continue to have water quality problems, specifically with regard to those contaminants. While it may eliminate all of the water, the manganese and other contaminants coming out of the wells, it will not do anything to address the problem with the contaminants that are already in the water system, the water mains throughout the town. We will continue to have that problem, and while we may not have a problem now, as it was shown when we first started having this problem, when we had a drought a few years ago, and they had to start pumping a lot more water out of the wells, that stirred up the wells, pulling up contaminants into the water that was being pumped. It stirred up the contaminants that were inside the water mains throughout the town, and that exacerbated the problem, and that finally got them to do something about it. But the point is that we're still going to have that problem. Those, they built the water treatment plant too late, because now we have all that contaminants still in the system, so it's still going to be a problem. So those contaminants are still going to be with us, and it's going to get worse if we hit another drought, because it's going to stir up more contaminants along with that process. Which brings me to the other problem that I'll talk about today, and that's the enormous amount of water that's being lost in the system. For the longest time, it was 30 to 35%. They claim finally last April or May, I believe, the town manager said he thought it was between 25 and 30%. But that's still an enormous amount of water. If you reduce that amount down to the state guideline of 10%, if they had done that years ago, found out where the problem was and eliminated that, they would have been able to pump a lot less water, which would have resulted in much less water being pumped. And therefore, when you pump less water, you create less agitation, which stirs up fewer contaminants and brings it up into the water system. So there's a problem, two problems created because of their poor management of the selectmen's poor management of the water system, because the selectmen are the town's water commissioners. So they let this go for a long time, and the town has suffered the consequences. The next topic is Shrewsbury Electric's recent letter to its cable and internet customers regarding the possibility that Comcast may decide to enter the Shrewsbury market as a competitor to Selco. Well, and what they said is that Selco is doing a survey, and they're pointing out the fact that Comcast may come in and try to compete with Selco, and they're trying to get people to in the survey to say that they would be willing to try Comcast. That would be a big mistake for the town, in my opinion, and for several reasons. First of all, people don't appreciate the value of Selco in this town. It's a well-run business. You get synergies between the electric part of the company and the cable and the internet. So that's a big advantage. You have the problem where Selco, well, not a problem, Selco also offers other advantages to the town in terms of not only do they pay the town in lieu of taxes a very healthy amount, which I doubt Comcast would be able to do, at least certainly as a startup, but not only that, they also contribute well over $1 million in what's called in-kind services to the town, which Comcast would never deliver. So what we would be risking is a major portion of Selco, which does a lot of good for the town, has these payments in lieu of taxes, and is, and really an overall great advantage to the town. And by allowing Comcast to come into town, risk that. Maybe not initially, but over time, because to face competitive pressures, Selco would have to start reducing its payment in lieu of taxes, or it might have to stop offering the town these payment in lieu of taxes and these other in-kind benefits. I mean, even this facility here and the IT services that Selco provides to the town, in many cases for nothing, is something we would lose if it got replaced by Comcast. And the other point they mention about Comcast is that Comcast will come in, and what they typically do in many cases is they will offer these great deals for the first year or two to people, and then after that they raise the rates up high. In other words, some predatory pricing to try to knock out their competitors. I mean, that is a known fact. The other thing I just learned about is that if Comcast were to say they wanted to come in, the question would be how would they install and make the necessary connections to the neighborhoods in town. I live in a neighborhood, I know a lot of people do, live in developments where there are no above ground electric lines or cable lines. And people like that kind of look. Well, if Comcast were to come in to the town, how would they get their cable connections made, their internet connections made to individual households? Would they have to string wiring above the streets? I don't think many people would like that. So that's something else to consider when we think about whether we want to have Comcast or any other cable or internet competitor come into town. So then I want to just go on another thing with dealing with the town in terms of recently there was a memo from the assistant town manager, Kristen Loss, regarding school children housing developments as of October of 2018. It covered a selected few. It would be nice if they did this for the whole area. I know they have this information. The school system has this information, but they only chose to focus on Avalon apartment complex of 250 rental units, Hills Farm Estates 180 single-family dwelling units. I don't consider that a housing unit. Otherwise, my neighborhood, Old Mill Pond Estates would be considered a housing development, So I don't know why they don't focus on the apartment complexes in this report, because Avalon appears to be the only. Well, Turnberry has 79 lots with 78 ownership units, so I assume those are like duplexes. I don't know. Tobin Hill Estates, 46 ownership single-family dwelling units on individual lots. In West Hills, the same. The only other housing, apartment complex is Madison Place with 96 rental units. So this isn't really a very useful tool in terms of finding out what kind of effect housing units, apartment complexes, have on enrollment growth in the school system. However, one thing they did add is I think maybe by request of the selectmen, because they wanted to know, is they say that the Lakeway Commons, the old Spags property, the 250-unit rental housing unit, they did add a statistic for that. And the chart, they didn't put together a chart because they only have one plot point, but they say there are currently 22 school children in that development. Well, guess what? When they were touting this plan, they said, oh, well, we had some consultants come in and do an estimate of how big an impact these apartment units would have on school enrollment. And they said, well, we think it's around 15 to, I think the number was around in the teens, 15 to 17, I believe. Well, and guess what? Those units are less than 80% occupied at this particular point in time, and it's early in the process. And already they have 22 students. So already, not even 1 year has gone by, and already the people living in those apartments are already contributing more students to the school enrollment problem in Shrewsbury than these so-called consultants had forecast when they put together this plan. And that number is only going to go up as the rest of the units get occupied, and as new people end up usually at some point getting married and having a child or two. And even though you have a one-bedroom apartment, that doesn't mean you're not going to have a child living there. It just doesn't work that way, regardless of what the selectmen would like people to believe. So again, that's another example actually of how the selectmen and other town officials use consultants to try to convince people about numbers that they're using, which just aren't so. So let's talk about, in connection with that, let's talk about these mixed-use zoning areas that have come to pass in the last few years. First, we had the Lakeway district that came in. That resulted in this property of, that property at Lakeway Commons, the 250 units there. And the problem with these mixed-use developments is that the way the zoning regulations are set up, they don't establish what percent of the land and the asset value of the properties are going to be devoted to residential and what percent is going to be devoted to the commercial part of it. Because the whole rationale behind these mixed-use developments is that they're supposed to generate more taxes for the town than they cost the town in services. But if it's well known, and in fact, at one of the recent Finance Committee meetings, one of the Finance Committee members asked the town manager to come up with that number. In other words, what, for every dollar that we get in revenue from a commercial development, how much do we get in taxation? And the same thing for residential. And numbers that are typically used, that are generally thought to be quite realistic, are for every dollar of commercial property, tax services that you provide a commercial entity, you get about $1.40 in tax revenue. So that's a big advantage to the town. That's why towns want to see a lot of commercial development, because they get more money in taxation than they have to provide these commercial developments in services. The reverse is true for residential developments. And so here we are. We have a situation where we're trying to encourage more commercial development, but in doing so, we eliminate the rationale for why we want the commercial development, because we're devoting these developments devote so much of the land value to and put in so many residential units that it costs the town more in taxes. It costs the town more in the cost of services for that development than the development contributes in the form of taxes. So it's very likely that the Lakeway Common development, the 250 units there, within the next 10 years, will actually be a net drain. Will actually cost the town more in services than it gets the town in tax revenue. Similarly, with the Route 20 development, we have the same problem over there. Again, that was done about 18 months ago, and again, the zoning, the way the zoning was set up, the developer for the old Edgemere property, they could say, hey, we're going to, and in fact, there's some of their the drawings that they did, which aren't anything to go by, but the drawings for illustrative purposes, they basically showed that probably around 2/3 of the land was going to be used for residential, but only 1/3 for commercial. Is that going to be a net benefit to the town? Don't think so. I don't think so. If down the line, whoever's here 10 years from now and looks at that and says, how much are we getting in taxation versus how much we're providing in the way of services, you're going to find that it's costing the town more for the services than the taxes we collect. By the way, the Lakeway, speaking of the Route 20 district, I guess most people don't know that there's a potential lawsuit against the town concerning the town's creation of the Route 20 overlay district. I tried to get some information about what was going on, and I was told, well, that was an executive session, nothing's been done, and they won't release that information about what the lawsuit's about. But I suspect that it's about the fact that when they put in the zoning, they said that the residential portion was going to be restricted to 1- and 2-bedroom apartments. Well, it's possible that someone is looking at that and saying that's discriminatory because it discriminates against larger families. And, there's some logic to saying that. Now, whether that's the lawsuit or whether it's not the lawsuit, the point is that whole Route 20 overlay district scheme was a desperate way for the selectmen to try to develop Route 20. And in doing so, they in effect, as I said earlier, it may end up costing the town more in the services a town has to provide than they're going to realize in tax revenue. And it won't be just that one property, because there are other properties, much as the selectmen would like you not to think there is, but there are ways where other properties along Route 20 can be combined and also turned into those mixed-use developments that, again, could cost the town more in services than we get in taxes. So again, poorly thought out. So with that, I just want to mention quickly on the marijuana issue. It's been in the news recently that Leicester opened and it turned into a major traffic snafu in Leicester. All kinds of problems for the people in that neighborhood. Shrewsbury is now talking about a second. The first one in Shrewsbury is going to open down on Route 20, and the second one they're talking about opening on Route 9. And of course, anybody who drives along Route 9 regularly already knows what how much traffic there is along there. So, guess what? More traffic on Route 9. Surprise, surprise. However, I just do want to point out that this whole thing in Shrewsbury was again, another situation of poor information provided by town officials. Last spring, or let's say late winter, when Shrewsbury the selectmen were discussing this, and the finance committee was discussing this, it was stated that regardless of whether or not the medical facility on Route 20 that facility was going to be able to offer retail marijuana as well as medical marijuana. And that was stated emphatically by one of the finance committee members. It turns out that that was, in fact, false. But it may have led a lot of people to think, myself included, that if we were going to have one retail establishment for medical marijuana retail facility in Shrewsbury, then what difference did it make whether we had two or not? So I think it may have changed some people's minds on that, and who might otherwise have voted against a town meeting might have voted against the marijuana article. Nevertheless, that kind of confusion and that kind of poor information and misleading information on the part of our town officials is just another example of how townspeople are misled on a lot of important issues in the town. I wish that weren't the case, but it is. So you can, and the point is we now have a situation in the town where there's just so much communication coming from, whether it's the weekly newspapers in town, or even the Worcester Telegram, or a lot of the cable programs, the local programming that goes on. Everybody speaks with one voice. I mean, whether it's the selectmen's shows, or the finance committee, or the school committee, or any of the programs that their members put on the side, they all speak the same voice. None of them they don't contradict each other on anything, because they all are in it together. And so people need to understand that and start reading and start investigating under the covers. With that, I just want to say that's about all for today's show. The next show will be taped in January, and I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Goodbye.